Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Deutschman, and I'm the Executive Director of the UC National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement. I'm pleased that all of you could join us today for the second of 6 Fellows in the Field workshops. As many of you likely know, each year the center selects fellows from a broad range of disciplines and backgrounds such as law, journalism, higher education, social science, technology, and government. Fellows receive funding to conduct research that will further the national conversation related to expression and democratic participation on college campuses. The work of the entire 2020-21 class of fellows was released last month, and you can find all of it on our website. The Fellows in the Field series is an opportunity for the higher education community to learn about the fellows' findings and how they can be applied to your day-to-day work on campus. Today, we have the privilege of diving deep into the work of Nina Flores, an assistant professor of social and cultural analysis of education at the College of Education at CSU Long Beach. Dr. Flores is proud to be a lifelong product of the California public education system, from K through 12 to her doctorate in urban planning from UCLA. Dr. Flores is a past fellow with the Op-Ed Project, and her public writing has been featured in national outlets such as the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, Ms. Magazine blog, Yes Magazine, and Progressive Planning Magazine. Nina's topic, tweets, threats, and censorship, supporting faculty through incidents of targeted harassment, is all too familiar and relevant to faculty members across the globe. Nina spent the past year examining campus responses to harassment, the types of formal and informal support faculty received, and the implications for silencing and self-censorship. Her work culminated in the development of a series of information and strategy sessions designed for use by individual faculty members or by their institutions. She interviewed scholars who were targeted by members of the public because of their scholarship. One of the professors she interviewed, Jonathan Grobert, has generously agreed to join us today. Jonathan is a professor of political science at San Diego State University. He's the author of Legalizing Transnational Activism, The Struggle to Gain Social Change from NAFTA's Citizen Petitions, as well as of multiple articles and book chapters. Later, Jonathan will share his story of targeted harassment with us. But in the meantime, Nina, I would like to start by asking you to talk a little bit about the origin story of your project.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this work and to share really everything that's been happening for the past year with this project. The origin story of this specific research, I've been studying harassment for the past decade. And so some of that has looked like studying street harassment and using Twitter to understand how harassment is documented and processed and how people organize against it. Some of that is harassment in conference spaces and examining, again, kind of these public areas where harassment can occur, where there's maybe no specific reporting mechanisms in place. This project, however, harassment involving the targeted harassment of faculty by members of the public, came about when I saw Jonathan Grobart going through his own incident of harassment. And as a former student of Jonathan's from almost 20 years ago, gosh, what year is it? It really hit me, especially being on the academic side of this work, right? And so having done research that examines harassment in public and public space, to then see this applied in a very different way, where we were seeing a targeted subject in public, but often online, sometimes in person, but mostly online, and to think about public space in different ways, both on the ground and online. And it really evolved in a way that drew together my training in urban planning and political science and education to now being able to study targeted harassment of faculty in public.
That's great. So kind of the intersections of so many parts of your career. So I was curious, I know the answer, but I'm going to let everybody else learn the answer of why you decided to focus on faculty members that have been targeted by members of the public rather than by folks within the academy.
So this is a really distinct issue, not just to me, but in general, and also what the scholarship shows. When you are harassed on campus, there are mechanisms in place for reporting. There are offices, either equity and diversity, or maybe even Title IX, whatever the offices might be, in which you would clearly go to that resource, you would go to that person, you'd report the incident, and there'd be a cycle that then happens in terms of discipline, action, or not, of next steps, of anything that would need to go on. When you're targeted by someone who is off your campus, when you're targeted by a group, when you're targeted by even unorganized, but just floods of people, there's very there's no mechanism that's clear or that's in place for you to report to right away, for you to get support from. And we see this also, and a lot of my participants referred to this too, in the context of anti-intellectualism in general, in an anti-higher ed sense. And so some of the people who I talked to actually had been harassed on campus as well, but they described this as such a different experience because it wasn't necessarily one-on-one. It wasn't necessarily, oh, that's someone I know, they're just, coming after me again, or kind of like the politics of a campus. This was a pile-on of strangers targeting them for a really specific characteristic, a really specific thing that they said that was perhaps even taken out of context, something that escalated so quickly. So the harassment they received on campus, sure, it would have been hurtful and annoying and maybe even bullying, these very different things than receiving death threats from strangers.
Okay, no, I think that distinction is really important to understand. I'm curious if you would talk a little bit about how you found your interviewees and whether that was challenging to get people to talk or whether that you found people were actually willing and sort of needed to talk.
It's just a little bit of everything. So the participants, we found them in, like it's me and another person here. I found them in 3 different ways. And so the first was through my personal network because I did know, I have colleagues who I knew had been targets, and they were from across the country, across the world actually. Snowball sampling, because once you talk to one person, they also know other people. And so they would share like, hey, do you mind if I give them your name? They have a story that I think is a fit for your project. Some of that snowballing also happened through requests sent to friends who then would send them out to their friends or their listservs so that people would then contact me. And then there was also a database that in a past project, a research assistant had put together incidents that had gone public. So whether they were covered by the Chronicle of Higher Ed or Inside Higher Ed, or even just local and regional news. And they had listed, what had happened and their names. And so there was also things to draw on there. A lot of people reached out. A lot of people. There are a lot of stories out there. Some people met the criteria for this particular study in that their incident escalated to a true targeted harassment by the public in general. Others had maybe one person that they always knew emailed them every time that they had something in the paper or every time that they would speak, and it didn't quite reach the threshold of what we needed here. Other people were experiencing on-campus harassment or just conflict within their department, conflict within the university. But either way, no matter why they were reaching out, people wanted to be heard. They were processing these incidents as they were happening. And it was really an indicator that there are so few avenues for people to process this, for people to, understand this issue as it's unfolding.
Yeah, I know a couple of people are asking about where to find Nina's amazing and interesting work, and we're going to drop that into the Q&A, but it's on the center website on Nina's page. And I can just speak for myself that when I had the opportunity to read Nina's complete work, the impact of it is pretty devastating in terms of what is happening to folks, and not just a couple of folks. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Nina. I know you want to show some slides and talk a little bit about one of the things that I was not aware of is sort of this concept of a cycle of harassment and how that works. And so I think we're going to screen share and have you take us through some of your big concepts.
Absolutely. So one of the first things I think to understand is faculty are experiencing this harassment in so many different ways. And so there's not really a uniform approach that's happening here. Some of them were receiving just a flux of emails because perhaps their email had been attached to a story, perhaps their email had been connected to a video somehow, and so it was an easy access point. You could immediately shoot off an email to this person. People were also, not only their work email, but their private email, because now there are so many sites, right, where you can Google someone and have immediately all of their personal information. So just knowing that almost any point of contact was possible. Faculty also received harassment via phone, so via messages, whether their office phone or their home phone or their cell phone, social media messaging, which is very different. So I put a difference here between a tweet and a post. So tweeting at someone or retweeting someone being very different than directly messaging that one person. And so there's a sense of intent behind it when you're seeking them out. Doxing, so again, finding personal information, finding stuff that you could send to their homes. And so there's so many different ways that this unfolded depending on the incident and how it was happening. This could include hundreds of thousands of points of contact. Some people actually had turned off their accounts, which is obviously what you should be doing when this is happening. But other people were not on Twitter and had no idea the extent of the harassment that was happening because it had not been happening yet to them. And when they saw it, because people were screenshotting this work for them, or letting them know, I don't know if you understand that this is happening on Twitter, you need to take it to campus police, maybe even your regional police. And so we can see like how this really is happening. This could be bullying, it could be gendered, it could be sexual, racialized. We have so many different categories of harassment. And then also there's this next level escalation that can result in rape and death threats. Obviously, there are implications here for safety, silencing, self-censorship, academic freedom, but this is the basics of understanding how this is happening. And if I can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. For my participants, there were several ways that people were targeted. This is certainly not what it's limited to. Some people were on watch lists. Some people did not realize that they were on watch lists, and others had. This can be a list that's developed by a group to target individuals, whether they're high profile or not. Others became targeted through their own public engagement. So maybe they were op-ed writing, maybe they were speaking on TV, and that was the source of how they were targeted. Others were targeted, but I put in quotes, watchdog groups, and these are groups that are purporting or claiming to find examples of bias in higher education, and so they would receive, they knew that these organizations or these groups had received tips about them that had included secretly recorded lectures, screenshots, social media posts, more, and those were then filtered through whatever these groups are and organized through their own listservs and through their own influence. There's also pylon. So for some people, it was, harassment was manageable until it reached a regional or national media scale. And then all of a sudden there was this immediate pylon that happened. And because they saw some people responding to it, then it kept going. And then there's this post-incident harassment that happens where the incident itself may be done, it feels wrapped up, and something re-triggers it, and then it restarts again later on. It could be weeks later, months later. And that was very unsettling for a lot of my participants. In the next slide, we can see the targeted harassment cycle. Now, this is something that before I'd started the fellowship, we were using this database that we put together to kind of figure out how this was unfolding. And the fellowship really, through these interviews, allowed me to hone this much clearer. And we see that this cycle happens first with this kind of sharing. And this can look like anything. It can be sharing something from someone's teaching, research, speaking, social media. It can be one of those tips that's given to a watchdog organization, if we want to call them that. It can be because some faculty are on TV or engaging publicly. Somehow this is shared. And then second, really closely related, there is this outrage or politicized messaging and narrative attached to whatever that share is. And that's what really riles people up, for lack of a better word. It fuels this harassment by the public. And I really want to make it clear, this isn't limited to one political perspective. And so while it's really clear to see how this happens with the far right and organizing on that side, this is happening on the left too in very different ways. And so several of my participants had acknowledged that they felt targeted through cancel culture. And so it was a different part of the public and a different approach, but it was still happening. In terms of escalation, this third step, this is when the quantity of the harassment is starting to really take off. It increases, the incident gains traction with the public. We see this viral sharing happening. A lot of this can just be happening through retweets, right, or reposts. So maybe it's not as personal for the person retweeting. It's more like, yeah, I'm angry and I'm going to do this. However, we also see this escalation of really specifically intended, targeted messaging. We start seeing an escalation in the, I don't want to say quality of the harassment because that sounds wrong. Yeah, an escalation in the specificity of the harassment, right? And those specific points are what makes them a little more dangerous, right? Like, I'm going to come to your home. I know where your office is, and giving specifics like that. And that's where we get into this last point. This last part may or may not happen. So it could be that things escalate, you could be targeted, receive all of these tweets, all these emails, messages, phone calls to your office, but maybe they have not reached that last point. So this is the optional, or it could go here, of threats. And this is threats of violence, rape, death threats directed at the faculty member, but also could be directed at their family. So I had several participants who were really concerned because the threat said, I know where you and your family live. You have a daughter, right? And just that even gives me chills, right? To even think about hearing that and what that would mean. So that threat part can also look different. So this cycle can happen in a really compressed time period, or it can happen over days or weeks. It really depends on the incident itself. And I think we're done with that.
Thank you so much. That was so helpful and an amazing way to condense such a large amount of information. I guess I want to kind of turn to some of your findings, Nina, and maybe you could talk a little bit about what you learned that targeted faculty members need in these situations. I think that's sort of the first part of the question. And then I know you know where I'm going, which is the second part of the question, which is overall, did faculty members receive what it was that they needed from their institution in particular?
Right. And this is a yes and no to all the questions, right? So I think that is actually leading us to the biggest finding of all, which is that this is such, it's not a one size fits all issue. Every incident is unfolding slightly differently. Every incident is dependent on so many pieces, right? Is this person tenure track? Are they a lecturer? Is there specific gendered or racialized harassment that's happening? And so when I think about this, like the impacts are incredible, but also so the main issue here with the one size fits all, that's not, I don't know how I want to say that, but it requires such tailoring to actually address the issue. And that's where these sessions come in. So the strategy sessions that I designed for this project in particular, they're meant to meet faculty wherever they are, meant to meet administrators wherever they are, the campus, wherever they are, in terms of being able to address this. And the one size fits all isn't going to work. I wish it would. It would be so easy to say, this is exactly what happens in these incidents. I've come up with a policy for you. Here is specific language to use, done. It would be so neat. It would be so tidy. And this is not a neat and tidy issue. And so that's the biggest finding to me, is just how different these incidents were. We see that different types of campuses are also responding differently. So whether you're a private campus and you maybe have a little bit more freedom in terms of what you're able to do or say or not do or say, versus a public campus that perhaps you're unionized, maybe your union has not yet started working on this issue, or maybe they have, to think about that. But the difference between the lecture and tenure track is so different too. If I'm part-time, some of the participants that I interviewed were lecturers, and they said that they felt the things they were expressing were so different in terms of, oh, was I going to be a bother? Was I never going to be hired if I started complaining about what was happening to me? So even those power dynamics were so much to unfold. We have people who were tenure track but not yet tenured, who also, as a junior faculty member, thinking like, oh gosh, what do I do? Where do I turn? Am I expected to handle this on my own? And then one of these bigger findings too was that so many people did feel like they were alone. And so I think that so much of the support, and when we think about like findings in terms of support, formal support versus informal support, there's a lot to be said about whether you feel like you have to navigate this by yourself, or whether you feel like your university has your back. And for some of these participants, they absolutely felt that. We saw some formal support in the form of campus police, who helped them develop a plan, made sure that they had escorts to and from classes if they felt the threat was going to emerge on campus. We had some people who noted specific administrators, right? They knew exactly who they could and could not go to talk to about this issue, and who they felt safe with. And we had other participants who, there was a range of support, who said, I got a lot of support from my department chair, but zero recognition from the university. I felt like the university maybe had turned on me almost, right? Or was issuing vague responses, but my department was so there for me, and I felt that support. Others had no support at all on campus, but the informal support was invaluable. And I don't think there's one participant who I talked to who did not mention, and they didn't say informal in particular, but this is falling under the category of informal support, which is that they would not have been able to get through this without colleagues, friends, family. You needed people to process this with. You needed people who were willing to go on Twitter for you and screenshot the worst stuff so that you didn't have to hear it. I had someone whose sibling would listen to their voicemails because they just couldn't do it. And the voicemails had gotten so bad. And I think they had said that there was one in particular they couldn't stop listening to because they couldn't believe it had happened. And they're like, now I wish I had never listened to it repeatedly because I could never unhear it, but I couldn't believe this was happening. So having even that intermediate person there. And then also thinking about informal support in terms of how you're going to do logistics day to day. So for people who this was unfolding during the academic year, during the semester or during the quarter, they relied on colleagues to help them with just day-to-day logistics, making sure that things were staying on track for them. Like, did I have someone to talk to during a break because I was worried that something would happen? Did I talk to office staff? And so many office staff are also fielding this harassment. And so that's kind of another part that is ripe for future research. Did that answer that question?
Yes, I mean, there's, I think, so much more. I don't know if you have the answer to this generally, but the people that, have gone through this experience, are you aware of most of them stayed in academics? And I guess one of my other questions is, did anybody talk about whether they changed kind of this is the sort of self-censorship piece, right? About what they said in class or how they taught because of this kind of traumatic experience?
Absolutely. The self-censorship, and I think someone described it really well when they said they went through what they described as a spectrum or a cycle of silencing to self-censorship. And so when this first happened, they felt completely silenced, that it was never going to be safe to talk about these issues. They described it as kind of like almost like an identity crisis in some way, because they'd built a career around this one particular issue, and they felt like they now needed to back away. They were concerned they were receiving threats for their family. And then they slowly moved into what they described as self-censorship, because they said, look, I no longer felt silenced after a while. I thought, no, I can do this. I started navigating in my head. How could I approach this issue in a way that maybe won't draw the same ire, but is still getting to the crux of the issue? And so we had that kind of self-censorship happening that they really distinguished from the ultimate silencing of talking about it. I've had a lot of people who said they haven't changed anything. And that's refreshing to hear in so many ways. And then there would be this silence like, well, okay, I adjust how I talk about something. And so there's even this internal battle of like, no, this isn't going to change what I teach. But at the same time, maybe I am rewording things because I know there are trigger words for so many different people that will immediately be this kind of, oh, well, you said that, so here's where we're going to take it. So that self-censoring, I think, has definitely happened. I talked to some people who changed what they put on their syllabus, because the syllabus can become this publicly disseminated document that, while it stands on its own, if you don't have context for the course, can be taken out of context really quickly.
Okay, I have one more question for you, Nina, before we turn to Jonathan, who I imagine will be able to share, his personal experience of how all these things unfolded for him. You did spend a lot of time looking at policies that universities either have or don't have. And I was wondering if you could kind of speak to that. I'm kind of a policy wonk, and I'm always saying it's never enough just to have a good policy, because then people have to know about it and it has to be enforced. And so I'm curious about where on the spectrum you found universities in terms of policies and how they use them.
So this is really interesting, and I think that it's something that I continue unpacking. There are some universities that have developed policies, especially over the past, I'd say 3 to 5 years, about targeted harassment, almost explicitly, or about dealing with trolls online. I mean, this issue is not going away, right? This is going to be a permanent part of our culture moving forward. And I feel so hesitant making policy recommendations based off of this research, because it's so individually tailored what's happening, but I feel like there's this window of opportunity now for future research. I'm like, hello, participants, and everyone else who's here, to really examine how the policies are working. So I haven't talked to people who were on a campus where a policy was in place and they were able to see how that policy unfolded specifically during an incident of targeted harassment. So while I think it's excellent that policies exist around this issue, if we haven't had a chance to test them yet, I think that there's a real gap there. Because sometimes that's where it ends, right? Writing the policy and having it in place, it's like, yay, we're proud of ourselves. And that's an excellent first step. I don't want to take away anything from that, because so many campuses are just ignoring this issue altogether. But do we know the policy works? And I don't know that we have much evidence of policies that are super successful or that have even been tested to the point to where they've been tweaked now and adjusted as the evaluation process has happened.
Oh, sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. Well, listen, I certainly think anybody that's listening, and certainly the center, would love to be part of continuing to fund the understanding of this issue. I want to now turn over to Jonathan. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for being here with us. And also, while it's terrible what happened to you, it clearly was what inspired someone like Nina to do this work. So I'm appreciative that some good things are later coming out of your experience. And I think I just want to turn it over to you to sort of take us back a couple of years to what happened. And then I want to let people know also in the audience, I see your questions and I promise we will get to them. I just want to give Jonathan some time to share his experiences and then we'll turn to audience Q&A. Jonathan.
All right, thank you, Michelle. I'm honored that Nina chose me as a case study. She's certainly been quite a support for me. She was first my grad student, back in 2004. So it's unusual. So I'm now a case study in Nina's scholarly work. So I feel like I've come a long way as a professor. So getting to my experience, I should note that I was used to controversy. And particularly, I've been involved in controversy on Israel-Palestine. I come at it from sort of a Jewish ethical perspective, but it leads to, say, tension within the Jewish community. So it's not that I hadn't been attacked before, but this was really just a brand new creature. So let me start then, if we can cue to the Facebook post, if we can show that. I only had about 90 Facebook friends, and so this was just a 15-minute rant on a Friday in July in 2017. So it's not as if I wanted this as some kind of op-ed. It wasn't intended for a class. It was just kind of what's on my mind. I mean, somewhat reflective, somewhat of a rant. But the point is I made critical comments about Senator McCain, and it struck some people as being improper, in particular because Senator McCain was a veteran. So I mean, you can look at it a little bit. I'm not here really to defend it. It really was just meant for my 90 or so, at least originally for my 90 Facebook friends. One ex-student, not Nina, but another one who I was close to, he liked it and he asked if he could share it on his. So I wasn't really that savvy on how people have Facebook networks. I didn't realize he has about 1,000 plus Facebook friends, and many of them are kind of, say, ideological enemies. And so they included San Diego State students with very Israel partisan views. So they were the ones that first took note of this Facebook post and objected and sent it on. So I started to get a few Facebook complaints that day, maybe a couple dozen. And then a local Channel 10 reporter got in touch with me, says she wants to do a feature on my Facebook post to lead the Friday night news segments. I didn't respond to her. I just thought this was just a Facebook post. It's not some like grand point I'm trying to make. But I couldn't help myself. I turned on, what was it, the 10:30 news hour, and it led with me. And it was really kind of eerie to see San Diego State professor annoyed at comments about John McCain. And the reporter then talked to a few San Diego State students that were quite upset and really piling it on. It bothered me. I started to get some emails, but it wasn't until Sunday, 2 days later, that this then circulated with the help of the college Republicans and then Turning Point and campus reform. Suddenly it became a big national issue. And by Monday, I think I was getting a request to be on Tucker Carlson's show and on Martha McCollum's show. More importantly, at least for me, I started to get all these nasty emails. So if we just go to the second one to just give a sample of some emails. And so some of them were kind of, these sexual, homophobic. Some are anti-Semitic. Most were along the lines is, I sort of don't deserve to live, and I certainly shouldn't be teaching people. And I also learned that there were plenty of calls to San Diego State administrators that I should be dismissed. And then I finally decided to check my work voicemail. That was even more daunting. I waited till Monday to check that. And there I got threats of violence, death threats, several more anti-Semitic ones. And I was getting bombed on Facebook. with just lots and lots of attacks. So that was how it became kind of viral. I mean, I guess that's sort of the bare response. I'll let it go for that and take follow-up questions. You're muted.
I know, I don't know why I'm having trouble unmuting. But, no, thank you so much for sharing that. I guess my next question is sort of looking back on that experience, what is it that you needed or would have liked from, let's start with your institution, and what did you get?
Yeah, I mean, at first I should say this really caught me by surprise, despite the fact that I'm used to some controversy. I wasn't used to just the level of vitriol and just how much it was and how I was just kind of attacked on multiple ways. So I wasn't really thinking very clearly. Finally, the chair of my department said, it's really pretty bad that the university hasn't really responded. And they didn't, when their one response, I'll just read it because I forgot to send it as a slide, is their public relations one was, the viewpoints expressed by students, faculty, and staff on their personal social media pages do not reflect the views of the university. We respect and appreciate Senator John McCain's service to our country during both his military and public service careers, and we wish him the very best in his battle with cancer. Okay, so, I mean, that's all well and fine for sympathy for Senator McCain, but the problem was this is coming in the midst of all these threats of violence, and they're getting it, their phones are getting it. It's really kind of throwing me under the bus. It's implying that I am wishing you bad health on Senator McCain, which certainly wasn't my point. But I think even more to the point, it wasn't making a statement either for academic freedom or just the fact that, whatever one thinks of my comments on Senator McCain, I didn't deserve death threats and all these other attacks. So I really felt like they didn't have my back. So what I would have wanted was some sort of public show of support, and they didn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, even on just the level of sort of basic humanity. What about, if I'm going to ask one other follow-up about, clearly you must have been concerned for your safety. What was the involvement, if any, of campus law enforcement in your situation? Was that positive? Was it not positive?
All right, so in some ways, SDSU was okay. That the dean at the time of the College of Arts and Letters, she sent me an individual email saying how sorry she is, and she assured me that I don't have to worry about losing my job. And she got in touch with the head of campus police. So they did assign someone to me. In fact, the administrative coordinator of my department, on Monday, she had called me saying, don't come into campus because people are threatening, to attack you, or at least to confront you. So I did get a campus police officer assigned to me. We met. He did have the San Diego Police Department send by a patrol, because some people did tell me they knew where I lived and they would be coming by. And he stayed in touch because this was summer, fortunately, I wasn't teaching then, but for the first day of class, he did show up just to make sure there was no one who was going to actually act out on that violence. Fortunately, no one did. So in that way, that was perfectly fine. So I had a good interaction with the campus police. But still, my problem is SDSU's administration doesn't have a system in place for showing that they stand behind the professor. And particularly public shows of support would have gone much better, would have gone much further.
Okay, that's really helpful. I'm going to turn for a minute to some of the questions in the queue, and I think both of you might be able to speak to. One from Roger, which I think really is sort of the linchpin, which is what recommendations, Nina and Jonathan, do you have for campus administrators to support faculty in these issues? And he says, I work in the Dean of Students office and struggle between wanting to support but not having the proper policies and resources to support in the needs that the faculty have. So Nina, I don't know if you want to start with that.
Sure. I think that's I mean, yeah, I wish that there were already policies in place that we knew that work, but we know that that's not the case on many campuses. So in lieu of having policies, or, when you are in that gap between when you have a policy that works or even resources that works, I think one thing that we can definitely do, I mean, beyond the kind of general listen to your faculty, they will tell you what they need if you ask them, is trying out some of these sessions. I mean, they are literally designed to get to the crux of what your campus already has in place, what they can build on. There's a whole asset mapping workshop that's in here that would really like lay out what are the specific resources on your campus that already exist that could be used also to address this issue or support faculty. What are the ways, how do people understand this issue now? How can we get them prepared now in case it happens? I mean, it's kind of like having an earthquake kit. When I was a kid, I had an earthquake kit, right? It came with me to school. And I knew on the last day of school, if we didn't have an earthquake, I could eat all the granola bars in it, right? It's like the kind of thing that would happen in Southern California that you do. And so I think that if we have this kind of kit prepared, if I know who my people are, what am I going to do if this happens to me? If I wake up in the morning and I find that I have this list of things that's happened, I know I'm going to contact this person. I know that I can go to this center on campus. I know that I've got these 3 colleagues that are going to check in on me and make sure that everything's okay. I know that someone's volunteered to listen to my voicemail, and I can't do that on my own, but how great would that be if it actually came as an administrative priority, that we want to make sure all of our faculty are set up. And we also want to be sure that we are actually going to be supporting them, so that it's not just on the individual, but we've actually created this culture on campus where we're going to stand with our faculty. We're going to support academic freedom. We aren't going to leave faculty feeling like they've been thrown under the bus, especially since so much of this is about scholarship, whether or not it's controversial, it's scholarship.
No, thank you. And I think that analogy, oh, go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, something. What's frustrated me, it's not just my situation, but something comparable happened to a group of students that prior year in 2016, is the San Diego State response was, well, look, we have counseling for them. We have kind of these services to help them deal with the emotional pain they're feeling. But I thought, you're actually contributing to the emotional pain they're feeling by not standing up, in the case for the students or for me. So what I wanted to see happen was kind of a committee that kind of looked back and evaluated what the university did wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think San Diego State's no exception to a general rules that administrators don't like to do critical self-scrutiny.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure you were finished. No, I mean, look, you have to look back in order to look forward. Another interesting question from Amy has to do with whether unions have stepped in to defend and support faculty. Nina, I don't know if you saw that at all in your work.
I have interviewed people who are part of unions, and there is definitely this kind of growing call among the participants, but also I think in general among unionized faculty. And I recognize that not everyone is in a union. For unions to step in, for unions to start developing this as a priority. Granted, especially in California, there's so many other concerns, but this is up there too. And so to think about how we can better leverage union support and the networks that already exist within the union. I know that there's one campus right now that's really trying to focus more on academic freedom and getting subcommittees within their union on campus as opposed to the broader union. To focus on that and to really find out what people know, because sometimes it's the lack of information that's immediately apparent, and people don't know even what their rights are when it comes to what they can say and do. And so I think, yes, if we can definitely issue a larger call to action for union support, that would be fantastic.
Well, I mean, I think education, right, is at the core of everything that we're doing in the mission of the university. And I think that probably a lot of people, I'm going to even go so far to say, even the people that are participating today, I don't know that everyone can articulate the difference between First Amendment protections and academic freedom. So even to start with those understandings. Martha had an interesting question that I want to share. She's talking about how she's noticed that in some of the lesser known cases of her own colleagues, professors have been targeted by a small number of students and faculty on their own campus who partnered with outside groups. And the question is, did you, Dr. Flores, find that this kind of partnering with outside groups is common? And is it just as common among left-leaning as it is among right-leaning?
So I can't speak to whether it's just as common among each because my research is not focused on that. But I can say that it is happening on both sides. And I hate using the words both sides, but it is happening on the far left and the far right, just in very different ways. But I know, and I've issued some in the report as well, some of the tips that were shared with these groups that are trying to find points of bias within higher education came from students. And so an incident that eventually would erupt over time or would escalate as a public harassment of targeting of faculty initially started because someone recorded a lecture in class and then sent that to a group like Campus Reform or someone like that. And so to think about how that can happen, it can be informal partnering. I mean, in that sense, it is informal. Someone issuing a tip, it's not like they work for them. In other campuses or in other ways, though, I mean, there are students who do work for these organizations, or there are people on campus who do. And so there is perhaps a more formal pairing there. I know that there's also partnerships between like Turning Point USA and some campus clubs. And so, those partnerships are going to happen. And so to think about how then we are going to address that within campus culture and within the campus itself is slightly different than the public targeting, but it is definitely hand in hand.
Did you want to add something, Jonathan?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm just an example of that at first I was targeted by specific students at San Diego State, but then they were networked to broader groups. So the college Republicans were networked toward Turning Point, and kind of the Israel partisan group at San Diego State was networked to a broader set of national groups.
Yeah, and I think I would also mention, I mean, this is a different lens through which we've seen some of these activities happening on campus, whether it's bringing speakers or whether it's harassment, of just like, do students understand how it is that they're being used potentially by outside groups? Like, is it really a partnership or not? And I think there is a role for people in the academy to be helping educate students to understand like what the ramifications are of these pairings, and that it can be really positive, but also can have other results.
Mm-hmm.
You have a couple questions, Jonathan, if you're comfortable in the queue, just talking about asking about were there any in-person incidents, and then were there other lasting repercussions for you personally, if you're comfortable to discuss that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess fortunately I am one of those tenured professors who was already full. So at the end of the day, yeah, there were no lasting consequences. I mean, thinking about this, there's still kind of that trauma. I did get on some more watch lists because of it, but even that, other than maybe an occasional nasty email, that's been the extent of it. So I suppose I'm one of the more fortunate ones.
And another question that a couple people have gotten at that I'm going to pose a little differently is to ask both of you, when we talk about a university standing up, what specifically would that look like? Like, if you were going to write those words, and this attendee asked, would you want a statement that says we stand by our professors and their academic freedom and request that the harassment stop? I mean, that seems good to me, but I want to ask you as the experts. Nina, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I will say that a lot of participants did note the very vague, what they called vague, and I think that word just kept coming up, statements coming from their university. One person said that she believed the statement had gone through so many legal iterations that it had lost all meaning. And so to think about if there could be more specific language around standing up, meaning standing with supporting faculty. As a university, we support academic freedom. As a university, we know we may not all agree on whatever's being said, but this is a space for exploring, a laboratory for exploring different points of view, whatever it might be. But I think that the vaguer the statements are, the more meaningless they are. I mean, we all know that. And the statements are getting so vague, so vague.
Yeah, I would say I would like a statement like you said, Michelle, and to assess in my view what it would take for that to happen. There has to be advocacy that administrators just have to be told. Maybe the union, the CFA in California, can really put pressure on the administrators. And secondly, is they do need to be educated on how these campaigns work. And so when they send out kind of these statements that seem safe from a public relations perspective in terms of covering their own, heat. I don't think they're aware that this could actually exacerbate the tension for the faculty or the student or the staff under attack. So it's a combination. Is they need to be sort of held to the fire, the advocacy part, and they need to be educated.
And actually, Jonathan, something you said reminded me too, that there really is a lot of room here to better understand how staff are experiencing this, because so many people I talk to are really concerned about their staff members. They said, look, this is happening to me and it's directed at me, but my office email, or my office voicemail rather, filled up pretty quickly. And what did they do? They then started calling the department office. And who's answering? Student staffers, right? Like work study students, coordinators for the office, maybe the department chair. But to think about all the people who are impacted by this. I had another participant whose harassment was for his involvement with a student organization, but it's by the public, but it's for his involvement with these students. So his students were part of this harassment incident as well. And so there are so many implications, so many ripples for how this is targeting.
Yeah, we had a brand new administrative coordinator that summer. And she was kind of thinking, what did she get into by taking this job? Is she going to get, because that Monday morning, there was just so many angry messages on her voicemail.
Well, one of the things that strikes me, right, is that this happened to you in 2017, and I would posit, this is just my own guess, that things have only, gotten worse in terms of the level of harassment, and yet the responses that you're getting, Nina, in terms of support are not that different than what Jonathan got 4 years ago, and so that to me seems like a little bit of cognitive dissonance. Stephen has another good question, and I think it speaks to the issue of sort of where is the line, right? And he writes, Professor Graubart, you have, outspoken views on matters of public interest. And so do you accept that you're in the public square and have to put up with sharp criticism? And I think really that question is asking, where is the line between sharp criticism and being a publicly engaged scholar and, the issue of harassment, which is, not protected speech?
Sure. Yeah, I saw the question. As I noted, I do speak out in particular in Israel, Palestine. So I'm used to those kind of exchanges. It says, these are just, they say they know where I live, threats of violence, saying that, they wish I had never been born, that I should be terminated. Those would seem to be pretty easy cases of crossing the line. And so it wasn't about just, people who didn't like my views. They didn't like my views on US foreign policy. This was really nasty threats of violence. And all I wanted from the university was to say that, these things are unacceptable, that no professor should have to fear for their violence or receive anti-Semitic, homophobic, other comments, just other nasty comments.
Okay, thank you. We have some more really thoughtful questions coming in. One from Jenny. Nina, did your subjects have a sense of the intentionality behind the harassment? Meaning, what were they hoping to achieve? Does the offense taking feel authentic, or are they using this to contribute to the culture wars more generally?
That's a great question. I think that we see all of it, right? So there are, and I think that one participant who really teased out the difference between someone tweeting about something or retweeting as part of this general, like contributing to the culture war versus I'm now taking the time to private message you with details about why I explicitly don't like what you're doing, but then escalating that to, I also have details about where you live. I also have details about where your office is. I also have details about your personal life. Oh, I saw you went on vacation recently, right? And the kind of intentionality behind that, and I think like what Jonathan was saying too, it's almost like you know it when you see it, that it has crossed this line. And I know that when I used to write more publicly about sexual assault or sexual harassment, I would get the kind of pushback and sharp criticism that I would expect being a voice in public, like writing op-eds. However, then I would also get rape threats without fail every single time I publish something. And so that is obviously the crossing the line. And there's such a distinct tone difference too, between someone who's like, look, here's what we need, or we need to think about these students or what's happening versus this is all about you. Here's what I wish would happen to you. And I have a couple of participants who have said that that's been a really helpful reframing for them. And it's something that they would perhaps tell others who are going through this isn't about you. it's about something so much bigger. And so when you're reading these attacks or when you're receiving them, it feels so personal, right? Everything feels personal, even if it is a criticism because it's being lumped in with these other threats. It's not like the cycle of harassment is so distinct that there's a point where the kind of critique stops and the harassment starts. It's all intermingled, but it's never just about you. There's always so much more at play, especially online where things can be anonymous. So maybe this person is who they say they are, but maybe they're not. Maybe they are, in my city. Maybe it's someone who actually has contact with me, but says like, oh no, I'm in, wherever I am.
Well, and someone earlier in the Q&A had just mentioned the difficulty of platforms moderating, and this idea that like even if you make a complaint and they pull down, my tweets, right, then I can just go make a fake name and it can happen again. And I think that's kind of a separate but related issue, which is what lots of people are talking about, which is like content moderation on social media platforms.
Mm-hmm.
I want to keep going through the queue. Allison had an interesting question about, are there effective ways to intervene in the escalation process to reduce the intensity or duration of these harassment events?
That's a really intriguing question for me because as someone who used to study street harassment, I have so many ideas for intervening with in-person harassment, right? Or when you see someone being harassed, like bystander effects. In the social media world, especially on Twitter or Facebook, intervening almost makes it worse. And so we've seen so many cases where someone, responds, then someone else responds, then this third person, I forget what it's called, it's on the tip of my tongue, the kind of algorithm that happens, and then someone responds to the person responding, and before you know it, you have these 80 people kind of all responding to this one person who was attacking, but it doesn't stop the harassment, it just fuels it in a different way. And because the post has then become so popular to the algorithm, it fuels it in an even different way. And so I wish that there was a way. I mean, I'm sure that there is. I don't have one and I wish I did. But I think that conversations like these lead us closer to ways that we can perhaps work towards developing better interventions, reducing escalation, really thinking about the way that algorithms are contributing to this, thinking about the duration of the event, especially when it's re-triggered by something later, and then perhaps a past post that was so popular is now machine learned into like, oh, this is popular, let's keep this going. And I think that those kinds of interventions would be immensely helpful.
Did you want to add something, Jonathan?
No, I think Nina expressed it well.
Okay, I'm going to see if we can get through just a couple more questions. This one from Martha's talking about, is it important to make a distinction between professors who are speaking out as private citizens, their choice and their right to do, she writes, and professors who are teaching and speaking on something controversial as part of their academic jobs? And, should professors or if any faculty members do a better job of distinguishing when they're not speaking as academics and not speaking for the university, or is that not within their responsibility to have to like sort of put up the personal versus the academic freedom flag? I don't know if either of you want to take that. I think it's a really hard question.
Well, it did shock me because my thing had nothing to do with teaching. I wouldn't say anything like that in a class. And it wasn't some sort of scholarly, part of a scholarly article. It was just a rant for Facebook, that I thought would go to some other, Facebook friends. So it certainly didn't strike me as that's an example of me being a controversial public figure where everything's fair game. So I do think a distinction should be made. I mean, obviously teaching, it needs to be kind of devoted to the subject matter. So if you're doing unrelated rants, probably, unless that's just a very rare thing that shouldn't be done. But this was a personal thing in my case, and I don't think that distinction was being made by many of the people by most of the people attacking me.
And I do think about too, I know I see so many people on Twitter who have a disclaimer in their social media where it says, I'm not speaking on behalf of whoever. And I think that that's, if it makes them feel better to do that, like safer to do that, or more protected to do that, then I think it's really helpful. But I also think it's unfortunate that we are in this time where we are really backing away from controversy, right? And we could be moving forward on so many conversations and so many issues if we could work through those controversies, as opposed to immediately kind of choosing the side and then fueling into some, I don't know, cycle of cynicism or whatever it might be. But the controversy should be happening on campuses. That's what they're for, right? Campuses are for working through these really contentious issues, and perhaps we don't have enough tools on hand to do that, or we're in a time where it doesn't seem safe to. All of the things can be true, right? Holding all those multiple truths. But I mean, the question really makes me think about that a lot.
I think that's you know, a sad but profound point to end on, which is like sort of when we think at its core, right? What is the goal of higher education? And if this is the response when people speak out, then why are people surprised that students, staff, and faculty are censoring themselves? I'm going to give you both 30 seconds to sort of, or a minute, just to share any final thoughts or ideas from the time today. Jonathan, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, this was a very upsetting time for me, and I think it is kind of an urgent issue. Other people without the resources to kind of protect themselves are all the more vulnerable, and it troubles me that universities still are not particularly motivated to deal with this issue.
Okay, Nina.
I have like two quotes from faculty that I just wanted to point out. One person had said, it's so simple for universities to make these experiences easier for faculty. We shouldn't have to come up with our own messaging on our own. And then they went on to talk about some other things. And then someone else ended with, I can tell you exactly what I needed during this experience, support and lots of it. And I think that just kind of the crux of this alone versus feeling not alone in terms of how these incidents unfold. And I really hope that these sessions that we've designed for this project are helpful in, no matter where the university is, or if it's not going to be at the university level, they're scalable. So if there's a group of faculty that you trust and you want to work through these with, then I highly suggest that, because these are just first steps in making sure that we have a better approach in place.
Well, I wish we had more time. This is the webinar that has generated the most number of questions, and both Nina and Jonathan have offered to be available to you, our audience, to contact them to talk. I want to thank both of you. I mean, Nina, for your tremendous work, and Jonathan for sharing your experience. I do want to just add that one of the things that I think is so key to Nina's work and to the work of the fellows generally is that she's doing more than just highlighting the problem, but she's really trying to give guideposts for how we can address that problem. And I think that that's where we want to focus our energy. There's the website where you can find Nina's work and all that other amazing work of our fellows. And I'm going to encourage you to take a look there. And then I'm going to ask you to mark your calendars for our third Fellows in the Field workshop. That's going to take place August 19th at 10 a.m. We're going to be featuring the work of Ryan Coonerty. His project is called Beyond Skokie, Speech in the Age of Hate. Sadly, again, a very important and timely issue. For now, I just want to repeat my thanks to our participants, to our panelists, and wish everyone a good couple weeks of summer until we see you next month. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.